Today I fucked up by falling in love with my coworker who became my best friend and unofficial FwB. Edit. I honestly didn't think this post would get that much attention. It's been pretty wild seeing the vastly different opinions to my situation from so many people, and even if I dislike reading them, I appreciate everyone who take time to actually read and comment. Getting different perspectives is good for me, even if I don't want to hear them. That being said, I want to clarify a few things. 1. I am currently in therapy. I used to see someone for several years until I'd gotten to a comfortable place where I didn't think I needed her any longer. But around January I decided I should start going back after a couple years working through things alone. I was lucky enough to get placed with the same lady. 2. I know I didn't make it very clear, but C initiated almost as much of the affection as I did. For all intents and purposes we were basically a couple. There were times when we'd be in bed and I'd make a joke about his other lovers, and then he'd look at me and say, "Just you." Not to mention several times telling me how much better his life was having me around. He dropped these little crumbs that made me think he was starting to feel something for me, so I just kept holding out hope. I know. I was an idiot. 3. While I am now capable of calling it what it is, at the time we never actually verbally established we were only friends with benefits. We never discussed rules or boundaries. I also told him in the beginning that I'm not the FwB type. 4. While trying to mend things between us, I absolutely made sure to give him space. And it was only once he'd started initiating conversations with me again did I start talking to him. It was a very sudden, complete 180 when he stopped communicating with me entirely. I'd expressed to him before that I value communication within my friendships and that I wouldn't take it personally if he had an issue he needed to discuss with me. 5. I know for a fact I am very capable of being friends with someone I have been romantic with or felt strongly for. While J ended up cutting ties with me, which sucked, but I understood, I'm friends with the majority of my exes and/or their wives, girlfriends. It was difficult at first, but eventually I do end up being content with simply being friends once I've had a little time to heal. 6. With that, I really do try to respect hard boundaries when they are set. I won't be attempting to communicate with C or S again. As much as I might feel like pitching a fit over it, that one attempt to say my piece and try to find a compromise was the only one I'll try. I'm flying out to Florida to see a friend starting tomorrow, so I'll be very far from the situation for a little bit. And lastly, I wrote this post at the peak of my meltdown yesterday. I've long calmed down, talked it out with the people who actually know and care about me, and wish I would have let it sit a bit before I submitted it. Snip out the unnecessary, elaborated where I needed to, and edited. But I didn't. Please try not to judge me too harshly based off someone running on pure bitter rage and heartbreak. End edit. And #X200B. Let me start off that this is kind of a long, convoluted story. I'll do my best to keep things from getting too confusing. Don't worry though, there'll be a too long did not read. At the bottom. The people involved are myself, F28, C, M31, and S, F29. I started a job at a grocery store a little over a year and a half ago. It's a small chain local to my state and it's an employee-owned business. Very relaxed environment. I actually really love it. When I started working there I was dating someone I'll call J, 29. It was a long-distance relationship and we'd been together almost a year. He was a good guy, but after our first year in July 2021 I decided to break it off with him because of compatibility issues. And because I'd met someone at my workplace who I'd started taking an interest in. This was C and #X200B. We meshed really well together. Had similar interests, similar easygoing personalities. Even discovered we'd ran in the same social circles in high school despite us never meeting before that. A couple months before this he'd helped me with my PC when I was struggling to find someone who could install the upgrades I'd gotten for it. And afterwards we just started building a rapport between us at work. I'd pop over to his department and chat at the start of the day and between breaks. He'd find me down an aisle I was working in and chat me up. Sometimes he'd come down and help me stock when he had nothing better to do in his department. Spending time with him, flirting, getting to know each other. It wasn't long before I knew I had a crush on him. So when Jay and I broke up, I decided I wanted to get to know C even more. I started talking to him about an anime I really liked that he hadn't seen, and we ended up making a plan to hang out and watch it on a day we both had off. Something to know about C is that he works 2 jobs. He's done so for a long time and he has very little time to himself. So making plans to hang out was always a challenge. When we finally found a day to hang out, I'd gone over in the evening after work on a weekend. One of his jobs is as a custodian at a school, so he had weekend evenings off. He had his own little entertainment room set up in his apartment and we hung out on his sofa while we watched. And the entire time, throughout the anime, I just kept, slowly sitting closer to him. And then eventually I worked up the courage to ask if I could cuddle up to him. He laughed at me and said, "Of course." And we finished out a couple more episodes cuddling. It was so freaking nice. I was walking on clouds. And then when it got late, he ended up inviting me to stay the night. And I did. I slept in his bed. Cuddled up to him. I asked him if it was okay if I could kiss him. And he told me I didn't even have to ask. I was basically done for by then. And #X200B. Nothing happened that night except that. We woke up the next day and I went home. We made plans to finish the series at a later date and after a week or so I was back over at his place. Same thing. I asked if we could cuddle, which he teased me about. And afterwards I ended up staying the night. Except this time I admitted that I wouldn't mind if we did more than just kiss. And once he'd confirmed it with me, we started an intimate relationship. During this time, I'd asked him what he thought about us dating. He told me he didn't feel like he had the time to commit to a proper relationship. I was disappointed, but at the same time I stupidly decided that meant, maybe eventually he would have time. And maybe then he'd give me a chance. So I kept spending time with him. I made it obvious I was interested in him. Admitted my crush. And that I was okay with just being around him when I could. I didn't want him to think I was using him as a rebound. And I told him that I don't really do the friends with benefits thing. But I found myself in that situation anyway. And #X200B. Something about me is that I've identified as being asexual for a really long time. I normally have an extremely low libido and it's so hard to get me off that I usually just tell my partners to worry about themselves. That I can take care of myself if I really need it. It's one of the things that ended both my relationship with Jay, and a previous relationship before him. I just wasn't interested in having sex. To me it was tedious and with Jay in particular I dreaded the idea of him even touching me. But that all changed. With C I realized I was actually attracted to him. And my sex drive grew to match his. And he was the first person in a really long time, years, who had the endurance to actually make me orgasm. As silly as it sounds, it just made me feel so fucking happy that I'd finally found someone I could feel this way with. I ended up getting tested for STDs, HIV, negative results, and such and getting an IUD. He'd never get off with a condom on and I wanted him to not feel like he needed one. At first he still used one until one day he finally asked if I trusted him. And afterwards he never used one with me again. But he'd still pull out. He always pulled out. And #X200B. This relationship between us went on for 6 months. We spent all of his free time together. We'd take breaks and lunches together, and even though he didn't get off work from his second job until super late at night I'd stay up to meet him just so I could sleep next to him. It got to a point where I was sleeping in his bed more than I was my own. I was showering at his place. And occasionally we'd wake up, he'd have to go to work and I wouldn't and he'd just ask me if I wanted to hang out in his apartment for the day. I always did. He'd leave me his key and I'd just hang out until he came home from his first job. We'd have lunch, or I'd hang out while he got ready for his second job and then I'd go home. Only to be back in the evening to stay the night again. We never officially started dating, although our coworkers definitely thought we were. And he still made jokes about being single and forever alone. I just kept hoping we'd eventually end up serious. I definitely implied it many times that I wanted us to be more. I fell in love with him about halfway in. I started taking better care of my appearance. I wanted to look nice for him. And, the biggest thing that changed for me, is that I actually started liking the idea of someday having kids. Even think I started developing baby fever. C wanted kids. At most 4 of them. At least 2. I've never thought I'd be a good mom. Too impatient. Selfish. Childish. But it's something he wanted. And he was so depressed that he'd made it to 30 and still didn't have the life he'd wanted for himself. I wanted to give him that life. I wanted to do everything I could to support him and make it happen. I wanted to work up the courage to finally admit to him that I'd developed real feelings for him. But I never could. I was scared. I didn't want to lose my best friend. Because he was my best friend. And he'd told me that I'd become his. I was the first person in a long time who he felt actually wanted to be around him just for him. Not because they had ulterior motives. And honestly, I really did just want to be around him. Even if I was in one room gaming and he was doing something in another room, I was happy to be near him. And #X200B. But after Christmas that all changed. He told me he'd gotten a girl's number and that he'd been texting with her. I tried to be supportive. I told him many times that no matter what, he was first and foremost my friend. Even if we never ended up being serious, I still wanted to be his friend. Eventually I admitted I was a little jealous he was talking to a girl. He teased me a bit for it, but afterwards I never heard about her again. Not until he told me she'd ghosted him. I was honestly relieved. We continued to sleep together through all of this. We made it through my birthday and then we were approaching February. I was looking forward to Valentine's Day. I really wanted to spend it with him. And I really thought we would. And then the snowstorm hit. I'd driven to work but I have very little experience driving in the snow. I was worried. I'd also left my phone at home by accident. So of course, I asked C if I could call my dad with his. We'd always been open with one another. He'd told me his password long before and sometimes he'd have me send texts for him while he was driving. And he knew I wasn't the type who'd go snooping on his phone. So he handed it over to me and I unlocked it. His messages were already opened and I saw that the first name at the top was from a girl. S. After calling my dad and getting no answer, I handed it back to him and kinda teased him. "Who's S?" And he told me, "She's a vendor who comes in our store every so often to stock her brand's products." I knew he thought she was cute. And I knew she was single from him telling me. And I knew he'd had a thing for her from before I'd even started working there. My heart sank. I tried to act normal. But I couldn't shake it off. We'd be sitting in the break room together and his phone would light up. They were texting constantly. I don't know how long they'd been talking. Don't know if it was before or after the last time we'd slept together. I started getting upset at work. I'm a very emotional creature. I also suffer from both depression and anxiety. I suffer from panic attacks. I've battled with thoughts of suicide throughout my life. Coworkers would find me in the bathroom hyperventilating and ask me what's wrong. At first I just tried to say, I fell in love with C and now he's talking to another girl and it's hard to watch. And #X200B. C finally discovered I'd been crying at work. I admitted to him why. I told him about my feelings for him. I also told him I knew that it wasn't his responsibility and I impressed upon him that I didn't want him thinking I was trying to make him feel guilty. He still told me he just wanted me to be alright. Hated knowing I was crying over him. But he'd never really engaged with me beyond that. He told me he'd never once seen me romantically. He'd made light of it when I explained how serious it was to me that he was the first person in so long that I could actually be sexual with. How much that meant to me. And how afraid I was of not being able to find that again for a very long time. He just made a joke about how good he was at sex. He didn't seem to actually take the conversation seriously. He started distancing himself from me. I cried more at work. I was so upset I eventually started admitting to the coworkers I was friends with the full story. Being careful not to make him out like a bad guy but impressing upon how I was just disappointed and needed time. But they were, to say the least, not happy with how C was handling it. They thought he was showing a lack of compassion when he knew how hurt I was and still would spend 20 minutes talking to S in front of me while I was hardly given a hello. I just tried to push forward. I never tried to guilt-trip C or make him feel like I was trying to get between him and S. I started dressing up and going out. On Valentine's Day I actually approached a girl I'd talked to at her workplace and told her I was going through a rough time and could really use some new friends. She gave me her number. We never did end up hanging out. But that same day, C sent me a text. He was pissed off that all of our coworkers now knew about our history together. It had spread like wildfire. That some of them had even been saying things to his face. I was horrified. I never wanted anyone to confront him about it. I always explained that I still wanted to be his friend. That I wanted to get over it and be happy for him if he ends up starting a relationship with S. I just was so upset. And I wasn't thinking about the consequences of our coworkers finding out. He minimized my broken heart to just having my feelings hurt. And then he told me he was thinking about quitting his job there. And that broke me. I panicked. I thought, if he quits his job, I'll never see him again. I'll never be able to mend things with him. I ended up calling a suicide hotline. They called 911. And I was eventually taken to a crisis center where I was held for 3 days. It was honestly really boring looking back on it. And probably not what I should have done. I definitely overreacted. And I worried a lot of people because I just went radio silent after telling them how upset I was. But in that moment I was actually afraid I'd hurt myself. A few years ago my mom ended up taking her own life. She lost her battle with mental illness, and it's been something that I've had a hard time accepting and dealing with for a long time. I'm much better about it now than I was when it was fresh. About a day never goes by when I don't think about it. My mom was such a strong person. No one saw it coming when she ended her own life. I didn't see it coming. She wasn't the healthiest person, but she took better care of herself than my dad did. And I always thought that even when he was gone, I'd still have her. If someone like her could lose their battle, then it's possible someone like me could too. And #X200B. When I came back I just tried to focus on my other friendships. With the people who've been in my life for years if not decades. They've been there for me through all of this, even when they don't agree with my desire to still want to be friends with C. I don't even know if C noticed my absence at work. They think he's a piece of shit. Just looking out for himself. Of course he doesn't care that I'm hurt. He lost nothing, while I lost my only source of intimacy. I came back to work to find him still there. He hadn't quit. But he was completely avoiding me. He wouldn't look at me, let alone talk to me. He would take the long way around through the store to go places so he wouldn't walk past my workstation. Eventually I bit the bullet and sent him an apology. Told him I didn't expect him to forgive me, but that I knew I was wrong for betraying his trust and privacy for talking to our coworkers about our relationship. I really do regret it. From there I just kept trying to be better. I still had feelings for him, but I've done everything I can to push them down. I just wanted my friend back by that point. And I was willing to put in the time and effort to mend things. I knew it would never be the same. But I've been in this situation before. My curse is that I always fall in love with my best friends. And I've been rejected and passed over for someone else before. A few times, actually. And even though this was different in that we'd been sleeping together, I was still willing to do everything I could to work through it. Eventually I asked him if I could start sending him memes again. And he responded to me by sending one of his own. So I sent him a couple. And he sent me another one the next day. It wasn't much. But it was a start. Then we started talking a bit at work. And #X200B. It had been touch and go. Some days I felt like we were finally starting to get back to normal. And then other days it felt like we were sliding backward again. Recently, it's been nothing but backward sliding. He stopped replying to my texts. And then when I had an emergency with my PC and tried to reach out for help, he confirmed that he hadn't seen them. That told me he had me soft blocked so that his phone would no longer alert him to my messages. I figured that was for the sake of S and #X200B. But we still talked at work. We joked and laughed and show each other memes and TikToks. Until a couple weeks ago. When he started giving me short answers again. I just tried to give him space. I'd tell him good morning and that was mostly it. I wanted to show him I was still willing to be friendly, but that I didn't want to push him. And then I noticed he deleted me off Steam. I'd never even tried talking to him through it. And the next time I saw him after that, he told me S no longer wanted him talking to me given our history. Said that she had friends in the store who'd report to her if she saw us together. Part of me had already wondered if that was what was happening. In fact, I wanted it to be. I wanted her to be the one I needed to be mad at. But it still stung. I reminded him that he'd promised me he'd never let another girl get in the way of our friendship. And I told him it was uncool. I told him, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll still be around, because I don't give up on my friendships that easily. I've always been stupidly stubborn and dangerously forgiving. I can't hold grudges to save my life. But then I left work and just stewed in how angry I was. And #X200B. I'd been C's friend before she'd been his girlfriend. We didn't even speak to each other outside of work, let alone see each other. The only time we spoke was when we were in the store. And what the fuck was going to happen between us there? Does she think he'll suddenly develop feelings for me? As if didn't have them before he was with her, he sure as hell won't develop them now. Does she think I'll try to force myself on him? What the fuck ever. And even if something did happen between us, guess what? It takes two to tango. It's not that I don't trust you. It's that I don't trust them is a bullshit argument. She doesn't trust him, full stop. And how can any healthy relationship function if you can't trust your partner? Not to mention. And I know I'm just angry rambling at this point. But I've been with partners who are friends with people they'd been intimate with in the past. Not once, ever, have I told someone I'm dating they can't talk to someone anymore, let alone be their friend. I believe that to be toxic and red flag material. The guy before Jay had a best friend he'd fooled around with before meeting me. The only thing I ever voiced to him was that it made me uncomfortable when she'd cling to him and flirt with him in front of me. But I never told him to stop talking to her. Hell, when I heard about the abusive relationship she was in at the time, I told him we had plenty of room. Move her in with us. Get her toddler out of that situation. Because I'm a goddamn adult. And I've been a toxic person before and it almost cost me friendships I never thought I'd be able to mend. I never want to be that person again. I stewed on these thoughts for 2 days, until today. And #X200B. I went in. And at first I wasn't planning on trying to say anything. But then a coworker I'm friendly with admitted to me that S had spoken to her. That S felt bad for me. And that S had told her she hadn't told C to stop talking to me. That he'd decided this himself. S had told my coworker that she'd almost broken up with C, that he'd lied to her. First told her we'd never slept together. And then lied again and said we'd only slept together once. And then she found out through someone else that we had much more of a history than he'd let on. S told my coworker that she might be pregnant. I was furious, to say the least. I felt used and lied to. I ended up confronting C right there at work. Called him out. Told him the exact same things I told him further up. He kept trying to say S doesn't want me talking to him. With my emotions high, I even tried to reach out to S. I wanted to have a conversation with her. I don't know why I thought it was a good idea. I told her I didn't want to start anything, nor that I wanted to seem like I was trying to sabotage their relationship. I guess I wanted to try convincing her that I'm not a threat. I don't want to take C away from her. I want him to be happy. But I also wanted to ask why there couldn't be a compromise. Why it had to be no contact when I'd done nothing but try to mend such an important friendship to me. I've never been rude to S. I've always been friendly if we ever engaged in conversation. Even complimented her hair when it had been done up real cute. Because she is cute. She's gorgeous even. And I get why he'd want her over me. But I don't think I deserve to be treated this way. And #X200B. She responded to tell me that it had been made clear that she and C didn't want me in their lives. That even though we had a past together, that she was his future. He'd chosen her. That I needed to grow up. And to never message her again. I just accepted it and said I was sorry. And now I know I've completely messed up. Even if somehow they don't end up working out. I don't believe C will ever want to speak to me again. Now I'm considering quitting the job I love so much because I don't think I can handle seeing him at work. Or her when she comes in. I'm just hurt. And #X200B. Too long did not read. I started sleeping with a coworker who I became best friends with. I ended up falling in love with him during the 6 months we were intimate only for him to choose another girl over me. I got upset and caused a rupture in our friendship that I thought we were finally working past until out of the blue he told me she wanted him to cut all ties with me. I then found out she hadn't told him to cut ties with me, that he decided that himself, that he lied to her about what kind of relationship we'd had together, found out she was pregnant, and in order to prove that she can trust him he decided to drop me like I was nothing. I got upset enough to confront him about it at work and now I'm trying to cope with the feelings of being used, lied to, and worst of all losing an important friendship I was trying so hard to rebuild. Too long did not read. Of the too long did not read. Her FwB coworker dropped her like a hot pocket after he put a bun in someone else's oven. Jesus, just when I thought I was done scrolling it kept going and going. It's 1 a.m. and I don't have the endurance to test this whole roller coaster. This sounds so toxic to your mental and emotional health. You really should cut him out of your life. The longer you continue to interact with him, the longer it's going to take you to heal from this. Not to mention the more pain you are putting yourself in. Edit a word. Shit. Even the too long did not read. Was too long to read. Seriously, any relationship this messed up and confusing isn't worth any future time. Insane. Step back and be glad you got away. TIFU by terrorizing a Chinese student. I, 24 male at the time, used to live in a dormitory for foreigners in Japan. It was mostly Chinese and Koreans but a lot of other nationalities too. The default language was English, which was spoken with varying degrees of proficiency. Anyway, one day this very shy Chinese student left an angry sticky note on the fridge complaining about someone stealing her strawberry milk, in broken English. After the note had been there for a few days, I had started to smell a rank odor coming from the kitchen. I looked around for the source, and eventually found that someone had left a raw steak on top of the fridge. The only way I knew what it was from the label. It must have been there for ages, it was completely liquefied and black. The only reason I hadn't smelled it earlier was that the packaging was intact. I nearly threw up. After I threw it out, I was pretty pissed off. I figured the Chinese girl's note had been up there long enough to get the message across, so I flipped it over and wrote, "Don't leave your fucking rotting meat on the fridge, you fucking cunt. I'll put it in your bed." As I was watching TV, the Chinese student came back and saw the note on the fridge. I could tell that she wasn't really comprehending the note, only isolated nouns, fuck, cunt, meat, bed, and the fact that it was scrawled very angrily. As it was written on her note, she interpreted it as a direct threat to her from her milk thief. Unfortunately, I didn't realize this until it was too late. She became visibly upset and turned to me, and asked if I knew who wrote it. I told her matter-of-factly that I wrote it because someone left their meat on top of the fridge. All she understood is that I wrote it. She became very scared and ran to her room crying. That was the last time I ever saw her. The next day, the landlord came and told me she'd accused me of stealing her milk and threatening to break into her room to get her. Luckily, upon reading the note the landlord realized it wasn't directed at her, but I was reprimanded for offensive language. Unfortunately, she still believed I was out to get her and stayed cowering away in her room, avoiding me until I left a month later. TLDR. Language barrier made my housemate think I was threatening her. I think the real fuck up is writing such an aggressive note for an, I assume, honest mistake. Language barrier wouldn't have helped, but a milder tone wouldn't have caused any issue for her either. So were you stealing the strawberry milk? What the fuck, dude? Came in a little hot on that one. You wrote it on her note, that's like pretty meaningful for anyone. Even if there was no language barrier, most people wouldn't know about the steak and the original person would be worried about the milk thief threatening to kill them. Are you an asshole? Yes. You're blaming language barrier for you being an asshole? Like it's her fault you're a poss? Today I fucked up by failing a drug test and feeling the oppressive weight of failure. So, I'm in a school that does routine drug testing for federal licensing, as in mine, purposes, so I'm always clean, excepting the summer. My finals just ended, so I started smoking again, as I do when I'm not being monitored. No biggie, I'm responsible and I've been what my friends call a professional pothead for over a decade. No one would guess I smoked, and I work in places where there are never regular smokers, so. Well, I've been wanting to get a job for the summer to keep a schedule going and have something to do, a lil extra money. Welp, I was prepped for a piss test and didn't do enough research. The job does saliva testing. Usually wouldn't be a big deal as the swab is typically a 12-hour deal with THC. Except my post-finals god complex got ahead of me and I ripped a huge one off my bong about 3 hours before the interview. This job is a super easy, retail job. In my interview the guy asked about school and he basically was like, oh good, you won't have any problem with the drug test then. Let me just say I played the whole thing so well. Did the swab and made small talk no problem, knowing I was gonna fail the minute they stuck that lil tampon in the mouth of the guy ahead of me. Lol, I feel so awful. It's not the end of the world or my career or anything, but I have never failed a drug test in a whole decade of smoking and being employed. So, my pride is smarting from facing the consequences of my own actions, but it's definitely something I can laugh at and maybe y'all can relate. Also, the amount of THC that swab picked up on was probably a crazy amount, and honestly, power move. Too long, did not read. Basically did a control test for a job to make sure their drug tests work. Screwed myself out of a job by ripping the bong one last time before the interview. You don't want to work at Lowe's anyway. Trust me. I don't smoke much. Nobody notices when I smoke. I handle it better than others. Smokes 3 hours before job interview. Okay. Why on earth would a retail job, which I presume would be minimum wage or barely more, require a drug test? That's absurd. Drug tests are an invasion of privacy. The fact that you submitted one for a retail job is absolutely ridiculous. I'm so opposed to drug testing I won't work somewhere that requires them. It's just weed. People need to get over themselves. Alcohol is much more dangerous. So really. They foo, not you. What fucking retail job requires a drug test? What are you gonna do, stack the wrong shirts on the shelf and fucking kill someone? You get drug tested for retail jobs? That sounds like a ridiculous infringement of privacy. Today I fucked up by disrupting my cat's affection hierarchy. Within my household, there exist, as I like to term them, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Luna famine. Biscuit death. KitKat pestilence. Sasha destruction. Much like the 4 horsemen, my cats have an established hierarchy, a sort of food chain where the apex among them may receive the most affection. Until now the apex among them had been Biscuit death. He is, unfortunately, the most intelligent, dexterous, and affectionate cat we have ever had. It is rare to see Death out of the arms of one of my family members, out of mine. When he's not snuggled up against us or sleeping on our beds, he's quite appropriately out hunting. On the other end of the spectrum, there exists the nadir, Sasha destruction. The idiot, the klutz, the fool. Quite true to her name, she has a tendency to throw the house into chaos. If I had a nickel for every time we thought our house was being broken into, but it was just Sasha stuck in a gate or having knocked over a pot or something. #id have 8 fucking nickels. That's not a lot, but it's weird that it happen it's a lot. And between those 2 polar opposites, lie pestilence and famine, KitKat and Luna. They dance between the 2nd and 3rd in command, but never dip into either the apex or nadir. My cats as a collective? Sharp as marbles. Capable of complex, nuanced emotions? Apparently so. Before these events took place I had no idea that my cats could exhibit jealousy, spite. Now time for my monumental fuck up. As of recent, I've been spending more time at home, and I've also found myself in another depression. I have also noticed that Sasha has been looking more down, subdued, and skittish, not unlike myself. I suppose I felt pity. I had never seen this side to any of my cats. I suppose a function of my less than frequent presence at my house, and decided to focus my attention on her. #death did not approve. Immediately after I started focusing my affection on Sasha, the klutz, the fool Biscuit death noticed. Over the next week I noticed fewer and fewer birds in my bed, less reaches for scratches, and almost no direct eye contact. Weird, I know. Shut up, I am telling the story. Even more so, I'd get jealous looks from Death every time I picked up and held destruction. I'd get brutal stares before Death would slink back into the dark recesses of another's arm. And then the hierarchy collapse occurred. Suddenly Biscuit Death was not the apex. Suddenly every cat in the hierarchy was fighting for the top, and so too was the denounced apex, with a violent, heightened intensity. Each cat now risked the fall to the lowest level of the food affection chain. Death would scare every other horseman away from my arms, and would ceaselessly chase them around the house if he didn't get the most affection. Suddenly destruction propagated from all 4 horsemen. If another cat was within the sightline of Death, chaos and violence would be assured. Pots cracked, glasses shattered, couches and clothes scratched and torn, and no longer will any cat accept my plea for affection, for death watches. I've tried everything, but the hierarchy has collapsed. #help. Too long did not read. One of my cats was looking kinda sad. Decided to focus my attention on her. One of my other cats got incredibly jealous, and no longer comes to me, and also scares away all the other cats to ensure that I give none of them the attention that he isn't getting. Edit. The cat tax has been paid. Face with rolling eyes. I have no idea how to add photos to this post, so I just made a post in my profile. Enjoy. Also thanks for the comments, has been quite fun reading through them all. Won't be able to get to any until after an exam is done. You brought this on yourself. Better start groveling to Biscuit before he lives up to his nickname. He knows where you sleep. So I have kinda been in your place. 4 cats, wife was having baby fever, so I'd throw a kitten at her to settle her down for a while, and one of them claiming me as his own personal lap. One thing we did to try to help was put a small dab of vanilla on the back of their neck. This changed all their smells, and made the house smell neat. And the cats had to work out who was who again, and the hierarchy was rebuilt. Edit a word. I think once you start considering inter-cat politics, you've gone into crazy cat lady territory. But then, you were already there after going over the 3-cat maximum. 1 cat normal cat owner, 2 cats perfectly fine. You just wanted your cat to have a friend. 3 cats borderline crazy cat lady territory. Could be fine if one of your cats is getting older, and so you've recently gotten a kitten so that you never drop below 2 cats. 4 cast, you've gone too far. The number of cats you have will only continue to increase. Okay, so I'm not a cat person, I'm a doodle mom. But this was like, the funniest thing I have ever read, and I commend your writing talent. I have zero ability to help you, sadly. Good luck. I think you mean, the 4 felines of the APAW calypse. Okay, so I'm not the only person who feels like there's a political subplot on my cat's life. That makes me feel better. Also, the only solution to your problem I can think of is to find someone who can distract death while you pet the others.